over time, if you don't have anything to connect learning to, what you hear just goes out of your mind over a period of days and weeks and months. However, if you review your notes, you can keep some of that in your mind. As we also learn from the Spirit of Prophecy, Ellen White, Child Guidance, we can only, as parents, we have to share with our children what we heard in the pulpit. So when the speaker shares something, we're expected to turn around and share that with someone else. However, if you don't remember what you have heard, it's hard to do that. So the process is to listen, think, visualize, review, which we've emphasized, and share. And specific things that I listen for are quotes, like Bible verses, Spirit of Prophecy, and so on, statements, any types of repeated phrases, sequences, questions that speakers may ask. And then we read also in Education, page 186, that through the use of blackboards, visuals, and maps, we can fix things into our memory. So we had a lot packed into the first night, because then we also created this visual Bible study together about the fall, starting in Genesis 2, and then as we learned, Genesis 15 contains a great prophecy and promise pointing to the Messiah, pointing to Jesus. And then our second night, our second time together, we looked at the prophecy of the Messiah, and we created this visual note together, starting with the command to rebuild Jerusalem, going through 34 AD, when the gospel was to go to the world. And then last week, we moved squarely again into Daniel. We stayed in Daniel. We looked at the image of Daniel 2 and the different metals in the statue and some of the dates connected to that. And then we also drew the beasts from Daniel 7, which relate, as you know, to each of those kingdoms. And so we left off last week with the dreadful and terrible beast down in the lower right-hand corner, with the iron teeth and the sharp claws breaking and destroying. But most importantly, which is going to lead into our study tonight, there were several horns, including a small horn that came up that had eyes and a mouth, and we're going to break that down and look at that more tonight. So that's kind of a quick wrap-up of where we've been. So tonight, we are going to do a study from my book, Visual Bible Studies. This is Chapter 8, Worship Styles. And so this probably, if you were doing this study, this would kind of be part one, because we introduce worship styles, and then the follow-up study would probably be, who is the little horn? So we don't get into that in the book. We'll leave that for a future study and drawings. So for tonight, I first want to make sure, does everybody who wants to draw along and take notes have paper and a pen? Who needs paper? Or everyone has set? Okay. So let me get my pen here. So for tonight's drawing, we're basically going to have 4 quadrants like this. So we'll fill these 4 quadrants just to give you a sense of how we're going to end up. Our first night, we kind of did a circle. The second time with the Messiah, we just had a timeline. Last week, we were more vertical with the statue, and now we have the 4 quadrants that we're going to fill. Now, some of these characters that we're going to draw tonight may seem challenging, but again, we can break everything down to circles and lines.
On that subject, when you're listening to a sermon, how do you decide the structure when it's an ongoing? You're making a study that you know what you want to say.
Yes, so that is correct, that I had plenty of time to think about this and to figure out the right structure. For myself, there are, so let me just draw a little. So if you imagine that this is a page, obviously your title is at the top, which is the same for all these. Typically what I do is I kind of go like that. I have some points here, and then I make points here, and then I just have a column kind of format. So basically I'm going in a zigzag like this. You can also, if you visually divide the page into two, you can have your notes coming down like this, and then come back and do this. If you have some sense, if a speaker says, I'm going to talk with you and give you 5 ways to be a better witness in the community, you can do something in a kind of a mind map style where you can have a topic here like the title, and then you can branch off like that and take notes based on what you know is coming are the 5 ways. Now, there was one sermon, someone came and spoke at our church several years ago, and honestly, he was all over the place, and I couldn't take notes. I had a really hard time taking notes. But 2 or 3 weeks later, I was going to be playing at the Eastridge Church. I saw that he was speaking on the same topic. So I actually gave it a lot of thought, took the notes that I had made when he was at South Bay, knowing what he was going to say, and was able to do better notes. Obviously, we don't usually have that opportunity to hear the same sermon twice. So hopefully that's helpful. So let me clear all this out. Actually, I'll just start a new note. Okay, so we're going to start by reading a text, and the question is, how did Cain and Abel choose to worship God? So in Genesis 3, that's when the sacrificial system began. Adam and Eve started coming to the Garden of Eden, to the entrance, and sacrificing. So when we get to Genesis 4, Adam and Eve had 2 sons, Cain and Abel. And in Genesis 4, verses 3 to 5, in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the first thing we're going to do is write Genesis 4, 3 to 5, which is, what was that? This is the first quadrant. Let me go ahead and draw the quadrant lines, because I think that will help us. You can if you want, or you can just kind of visualize your page into the 4 quadrants. All right, so in Genesis 4, in this passage we just read, we have 2 characters. Who are those characters? Cain and Abel. All right, so let us draw Cain first. And you'll just have to follow along and wonder where we're going. This is a little bit of connect the dots. So just draw 2 circles like this. And then connect the circles. And then on the side of either circle, just draw up like this. Draw arch lines going up. And then draw a straight line across like this. This is actually Cain's offering. He's bringing an offering of fruit. So we're just going to put some little circles, maybe some squiggly lines, to represent something in the bowl. Okay, so from the two round circles are his hands holding the bowl. And I recently read someone say that if you're drawing a person and you put something approximately where a hand would be, people will see that as a hand. So hands are the hardest thing that artists have to draw. They're very difficult to draw because you can have all kinds of shapes, but we are not artists, remember. We are drawing just to emphasize key points. And the hands themselves are not critical to the story. So from our hands, we're just going to draw 2 vertical lines and then connect those. And again, just like we did not really draw hands, we draw a representation of hands. We're just going to put out something like this for feet. Normally, if you've been here, you know we start with the head and we don't really draw bodies. Okay, then at the top here, just kind of draw an N, an upside down U. And I realize you cannot do on paper what I'm doing right now. So I apologize. But we would have a headless Cain otherwise. All right, then we'll draw our traditional head with the cereal bowl, the half semicircle. Now Cain was very angry and his countenance fell. So this isn't easy. The Bible has given us the emotion to draw. We'll give Cain some ears and just some hair. And just in case there's any doubt, we'll label this character Cain. Okay, so these words are not recorded in the Bible, but I imagine based on the text that we read, Cain said, "I'll do it my way." Right? God had a specific way he required to be worshiped. Bring your lamb, bring the firstborn of the flock and of their fat, as the Bible says. Cain was like, no, I'm going to do my thing. I'm doing it my way. Okay, so now let us draw Abel. And just like we drew the bowl of fruit first for Cain, we're going to draw the sheep, the lamb, first, that he is bringing his offering. So again, we'll keep their hands at the same level. And then we're going to draw an oval right here, off to the side. And this is the sheep's head. So we'll just draw some ears and a little bit of fluff on top. And give the sheep some eyes. And then if you put a Y right there at the bottom of the oval, that kind of gives you the mouth and the nose of the sheep. And I'll zoom in a little bit. Okay, it is a sheep. Sheep are, how would you describe a sheep? The shape of a sheep. They're fluffy. So we're just going to kind of draw a cloud shape to represent our fluffy sheep. All right, so on top of our sheep, we'll draw a little arch like this. And then on top of that arch, we'll draw our face for Abel. And just finish off the head of Abel. And then below the sheep, again, we'll just draw a robe. And we'll draw some feet as well. Okay, Cain said, I will do it my way. Abel, so we'll label Abel here. Imagine Abel saying, I'll do what God asks. I'll do what God asks. Okay, so this is an early example. We saw first with Adam and Eve that God specifically said, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They ate from the tree. So that was our first example of God's way versus man's way. And then this is our second example, I think, in the Bible of God's way versus man's way. Cain said, I'm going to do my thing. Abel said, I will do what God has asked us to do. Okay, so now, I love in the Bible, and we actually saw this in our text today, in the process of time it came to pass. So in Genesis 3, you had Adam and Eve, no children. Genesis 4, verse 1, adult children, or at least youthful children who know how to go and sacrifice. So it came to pass, we're going to skip over many generations and many years, and we're going to look at the children of Israel. And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, what important feast day did God command Israel to observe? And this is in Leviticus 23:27. So we're going to write this. First, I'm going to have you draw a horizontal line like this. And a little bit up from that line, let's write our verse, Leviticus 23:27. And I'll read that for us. So he made offerings on the altar which he had made at Bethel. Nope, sorry, that's the wrong text. Leviticus 23:27. Also on the 10th day of this 7th month shall be the day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation for you. You shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. So the 10th day of the 7th month. 10th day, 7th month. Okay, and that was, even though we learned about this in Leviticus and the children of Israel, we're actually going to label this Judah. And we'll see why in just a minute. Okay, so because we're doing visual notes and we want to go all the way in our visual process, we're going to draw a little goat right here, because the goats were critical on the Day of Atonement, right? There was the scapegoat and the Lord's goat. So draw a sort of a C with the two ends close together. On the left-hand side of the C, just draw a little shape like that. And then on the other side, you'll also draw a little shape like this. Just some curved lines. And so we'll just put in some eyes. And then sheep and goats have very similar facial features, so we can use our Y again for the face. And then you could stop right here and say, here's your goat. But to make it more goaty, I'm going to draw some little horns right here. Okay, now, so from the time they were in the wilderness, there was a period of time when the children of Israel were sent back into the wilderness for how many years? 40 years. And during that time, they did not observe the Passover. But once they got into the land of Canaan, they continued the Passover. And the Passover continued yearly through until Jesus was sacrificed. And as you know, the world just celebrated Easter this last Sunday, and so this was on people's minds, and my neighbors sent me Happy Easter, and I responded with a couple of texts from the Desire of Ages, or passages, not texts. Okay, so the children of Israel became Israel during the Passover. After Solomon died, his son Rehoboam became king. And he promised to oppress Israel more than Solomon did. And so as a result, 10 of the tribes separated as Israel, right? And 2 tribes stayed as Judah. That's why we have labeled this Judah. Okay, now, the first king of the 10 tribe Israel was who? Jeroboam. And throughout the rest of the history of the 10 tribe Israel, all of the kings are compared to Jeroboam. It's like they were as evil as Jeroboam, or the wickedness of Jeroboam. Many phrases like that. So why was Jeroboam so wicked and such a bad guy? We're going to find out in a minute. So let's write a verse here. 1 Kings 12:33. So Jeroboam made offerings on the altar which he had made at Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month. So we can write 15th day, 8th month. And this is Israel. And Jeroboam intentionally changed the dates. And he ordained a feast for the children of Israel and offered sacrifices on his altar. Now Jeroboam was a thoughtful king. And he was like, you don't have to go to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices. I'm going to let you do it right here. So he created 2 worship centers. And he made 2 calves of gold for the people to worship. So instead of following what God had asked, go to Jerusalem and offer your sacrifices there, he was like, just do it here on the day that I have assigned to you. All right, so to help us remember that it was a golden calf that Jeroboam had, we're actually going to draw a calf. So if you do kind of a gentle curve, which you're familiar with, and then we'll do a curve on top like this, and then draw a kind of a wide N or an upside down U. And then put in some ears on either side. And again, we'll put little horns. Put in some eyes. My calf is a little squatty because I didn't give myself enough room, and I didn't want to cheat again. I'm trying to play along with you all. So eyes and some nostrils. And then just for fun, we'll give it kind of a Jersey cow effect. So this is our reminder that Judah, the Day of Atonement, was so important, and they had specific animals that were to be sacrificed, the goats. Israel, as the 10 tribes, worshiped on a different day with the golden calves. Okay, I see that I am running out of time, so we're going to double speed our drawing. So, we're going to move forward in time again to Daniel. And remember, we talked about the 4 beasts, the lion beast, the bear beast, the leopard beast, and then the terrible beast. So as I was considering the horns, here's our question. What did Daniel see emerging from the 4th beast? Well, we know the answer to this because we talked about it last week. But in Daniel 7:8, so Daniel 7, verses 8 and 25. Daniel 8, I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little horn coming up among them. 3 horns were plucked out, which we did last week. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. So to draw our big horn, we're just going to do, even though it's a little horn, we're drawing it big so we can see it. There's our horn shape. So to me, I think if someone is speaking pompous words, kind of yelling, and again, I imagine that this horn would be angry. So we have the little horn, and then if we read in verse 25, what was the intention of the little horn? He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and laws. So this is the little horn. And I imagine we'll just verbalize his intention. I'm changing times and laws. Okay, now we know from John 10:33 that the Jews said to Jesus, we stone you for blasphemy because you, being a man, make yourself God. So Satan desired the worship due only to God. We saw this with Cain, we saw this with Jeroboam. The little horn kingdom wanted to change something that God established. Okay, so let's come into our last quadrant on the right, and we are going to draw the 10 Commandments in the traditional shape. And we're just going to leave it like that. We're not going to fill in the 10 Commandments, just that shape. Now, this is the traditional shape that we know. In reality, if you read in Exodus, I think Exodus, it was 2 tablets, and the writing was front and back. So it's kind of a different approach than what we see. So anyway, what law did the little horn intend to change? So if we read in James 2, 10 and 11, for whoever shall keep the whole law yet stumble in one point, he is guilty of all. For he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not murder. Now if you do not commit adultery, but you do murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. So James is clearly talking about the 10 Commandments, not the ceremonial law. And we have several verses throughout Scripture that pointed to that. Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my commandments. In Revelation, here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Okay, now, so we know that this is the 10 Commandments. So let's write Exodus 20, 8 to 11. So the question is, what command includes a specific time reference? And we can just draw a little thing like this so that we know that there's a specific time reference. And then if we look in the Ten Commandments and we know that it is the fourth commandment, so we can just write a 4 here and put little dots around it. And then connect that to Exodus, like so. So it's the fourth commandment. So when was the seventh day established as a day to worship God? So we know that that is in Genesis 2:3. And I'm going to draw just a little kind of an atom-looking shape, sort of three overlapping shapes, ovals, to kind of represent an atom. And what is special about the fourth commandment? Well, we know that it contains a seal of God. So it has the title of the king, his authority, and the territory. Okay, so what biblical support exists for Sunday as the day of worship? Because we've learned in previous studies that the seventh day Sabbath is what God set aside, and this is still the day that he wants. And the little horn changed the day of worship from Sabbath, Saturday, to Sunday. There's clearly lots of evidence in the New Testament that that is actually false. We know that Saturday is still the Sabbath. Okay, so right down here, we're going to, underneath the Ten Commandments, we're going to draw a little seal like this, and we're just going to put name, title, and territory. And then we're going to extend our dotted lines from that seal to the fourth commandment. Okay, now, what does Jesus ask us to do? And this is 1 John 5:3. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. So if we love God, we'll draw a little heart shape, we will keep his commandments. Okay, so we've seen in this study the history of the world. There's always been two camps. Those who say we're going to do what God asks, which is generally a much smaller group, and those who say, I'm going to do it my way. And we saw that attitude. Frank Sinatra was not the first person to say, I'm doing it my way. Cain said that. Jeroboam said that. The little horn has said that. We're doing it our way. I'm doing it my way. But then we're grounded in the fact that God has a way, a specific way that he wants us to worship him. And just like he said, sacrifice this type of animal, have this type of animal to represent me. We know that the Ten Commandments is what we still have to keep, and specifically the fourth commandment is one that God has made extra sacred. And it was established at creation, and today we still must keep his commandments. So that is our overview of worship styles. And if we had another study, we could actually go into the next part of who is the little horn and break that down. But we're going to stop here tonight, and I'm going to ask the pastor to come up and tell us about the next series that's coming up, and you'll probably need a microphone, and close us with prayer.
Southern Union. She's our
Al-Haddad.
Al-Haddad. Yes, I knew it was something different. Yeah. But I know this lady. She's a super fine lady. We had her come to Greenville, pastored up there, and she's spoken at ministers' meetings and so forth. But she's the religious liberty director for the Southern Union. And I don't know about you, but as we see some of the things going on, it makes your mind spin as you think of religious liberty and all the things that are taking place right now in our world. Of course, the Pope passed away yesterday, and that brings with it a whole question of who will be the next Pope and what will be their emphasis and so forth. So that will probably have already occurred as far as the installation of the new Pope. Probably will have occurred by the time she is able to speak. So she may address some of that as well. She'll be talking about Christian nationalism. She'll be talking about things that are taking place in the legislation right now, in the legislature. So just want to encourage you to pay attention and come to that. I think come to that. I believe we may do that one on Zoom, and here's the reason why. She will be joining us via Zoom. So rather than, and I've asked her if she'll do some Q&A. So rather than try to navigate the AV system with a Zoom session, most likely we'll share an update in the relay, but most likely we'll have that on Zoom, still working those details out. Yes? May 6th and May 13th. So two weeks for that. Then the third Tuesday of May, we will be doing volume 2 of the testimonies. Can you believe that? Yeah. So if you're a little behind, time's now to catch up. May I don't know the date right off, but the third weekend or third Tuesday of the month, we'll do the testimonies volume 2, and we'll do that in person. And then we will have a summer series with Phil Mills, and he's going to be studying with us on the book of Genesis. Okay, and not just the book of Genesis, but specifically how the book of Genesis speaks to our time as well. Okay, so some of the relevant typology and so forth that speaks to our day. So that will be our summer series, and yeah, that's what's coming down the pike. So please watch the relay and the planning ahead email that comes out on Tuesdays, as well as the bulletin, to keep abreast of all those details. Okay? Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Dear Lord, I thank you so much that you have given each one of us different talents and skills. And I thank you for what Doug has shared with us these past 4 weeks as he has shared his interest and passion for drawing and making the Bible come alive through symbol and diagram. I pray that you'll help us, Lord, to apply what we've learned, and that you'll help us to continue to grow in our walk with you, that we might impart your love to others as we become a vehicle for your grace. In Jesus' name we pray.